Barron Trump's surprise speech at his father's inauguration left the nation in shock, and what he said could change everything. Outside the Capitol, the air was filled with excitement and uncertainty. Donald Trump's swearing in as the 47th President of the United States had sparked both hope and division across the country. As thousands cheered and waved flags, cameras captured the familiar faces of the Trump family, standing united and strong despite a divided political climate. All eyes were on Donald Trump as he delivered his second inaugural address, speaking with boldness and confidence that his supporters expected. His voice echoed through the crowd as he shared his vision for the next 4 years, but beneath the words, there was a sense of tension. The nation he addressed was deeply divided, and reconciliation seemed far away as Trump stepped back from the podium after his speech. The crowd erupted in loud applause, and the camera focused on the Trump family, their faces full of pride and composure. Melania Trump stood gracefully beside her youngest son, Barron, who had grown into a tall and impressive figure. At 18, Barron was almost 7 feet tall, his height impossible to ignore, even though he remained quiet and reserved as usual. Then, something unexpected happened. As the applause began to die down, Barron Trump, dressed in a sharp black suit, stepped forward. His movement was slow at first, almost as if he were testing the waters. The crowd's cheers softened into whispers of curiosity, with people exchanging confused glances, unsure of what was coming next. Even his family seemed momentarily surprised. Donald Trump looked at his son with a mix of surprise and curiosity. Barron adjusted his tie, took a deep breath, and walked up to the podium. As he leaned in, the microphones picked up the soft sound of his breath, and the murmurs faded into complete silence. The youngest Trump, who had always lived in the shadow of his father's larger-than-life persona, was about to address the nation for the first time. In that moment, the entire atmosphere changed. What had started as a typical political ceremony transformed into something unexpected. Barron's expression was calm but focused, his presence exuding quiet determination. He scanned the crowd with steady eyes, as if searching for something or someone. Today, he began, his voice soft but steady, is a day that marks not just a new chapter for my father, but for all of us. The crowd leaned in, eager to hear more. What would he say? Why now? These questions lingered in the air, but Barron's calm demeanor quieted any doubts. Then, what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. Barron's speech would not only capture the spotlight, but also spark a nationwide conversation. Barron's voice, steady yet thoughtful, seemed to carry the weight of the moment. Today is about more than just celebrating a presidency, he began, pausing briefly, as if choosing his words carefully. It's about looking inward and asking ourselves, what kind of country do we want to be? The crowd, still unsure of what was happening, remained unusually quiet. A mix of curiosity and tension filled the air. Barron's tone wasn't grand like his father's or smooth like a seasoned politician. It was something different, raw, reflective, and deeply personal. He continued, speaking not as the son of a president, but as a young man confronting the challenges he had witnessed firsthand. I've spent much of my life watching from the sidelines, he admitted, his eyes sweeping over the crowd. Watching arguments on TV, reading about people who feel unheard, and listening to stories from both sides of the divide. For a long time, I stayed silent, thinking it wasn't my place to speak. His honest words resonated deeply with many in the audience, particularly the younger people who often feel overlooked in political discussions. Barron then changed his tone, speaking with quiet determination. But staying silent hasn't solved anything. In fact, it's only made things worse. We've let anger and fear define us for too long, and it's tearing us apart. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Barron remained steady, continuing to speak about the divisions that had divided the nation, political, cultural, and generational, and the toll they had taken. Yet, instead of focusing on the problems, he shifted to solutions, offering a vision that seemed unexpectedly mature for someone so young. We don't have to agree on everything, he said, his voice growing stronger with each word, but we do have to agree on one thing, that the future we want for this country is worth fighting for. And that starts not with shouting, but with listening. The weight of his words hung in the air, and the crowd shifted in their seats, their expressions ranging from surprise to admiration. Barron's speech wasn't what anyone had expected. It wasn't politically charged or rehearsed. It was personal, reflective, and surprisingly hopeful. Then came the moment that would stay with everyone in the crowd long after. Barron paused to take a breath, glanced back at his family, and then turned to face the crowd. With a quiet but firm tone, he said, "We're all responsible for the state of this nation, and we all have the power to make it better, not by waiting for someone else to fix it, but by starting with ourselves." For a brief moment, the silence was almost deafening. The weight of his words hung in the air, as if the crowd was collectively processing the gravity of what they had just heard. Barron, unwavering, closed with a powerful message. "If my generation is to inherit this country, I ask only one thing: let us inherit a country we can be proud of." As he stepped back from the podium, the silence lingered, almost as if time had stopped. Then, slowly but surely, the crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't the loud, explosive applause of a political victory or campaign rally. It was measured, thoughtful, almost reverent. Barron Trump, the young man who had spent much of his life in the background, had just delivered a message that felt as much like a challenge as it did a plea, and the nation, for once, seemed willing to listen. As the applause echoed through the Capitol, one question remained: would Barron's words be remembered as a fleeting moment of clarity, or would they spark a deeper change in the country's heart? As Barron stepped away from the podium, the crowd stayed in stunned silence for what felt like an eternity. Then, applause rippled through the audience, growing steadily until the room was filled with a mix of clapping, cheering, and even a few emotional gasps. But this applause was different. It wasn't driven by party loyalty or political triumph. It was something different, the sound of a crowd wrestling with an unexpected moment of honesty and vulnerability. Outside the Capitol, Barron's speech quickly took on a life of its own. By the time the inauguration ceremony ended, social media was buzzing. Clips of his speech flooded every major platform, with hashtags like #HatchBarronTrumpSpeech and #VoiceOfUnity trending worldwide. On TikTok, users dissected his every word, while Twitter debates ignited between those who praised his maturity and those who questioned his intentions. On Instagram, a video of Barron speaking racked up millions of views, with comments ranging from admiration to skepticism. Cable news networks immediately picked up the story, airing his full speech and dedicating hours of coverage to analyzing it. Conservative commentators praised his ability to rise above political divides, calling him a voice of reason in chaotic times. On liberal platforms, reactions were more mixed. Some acknowledged the sincerity in his words, while others accused him of trying to repair the Trump family's image. Yet, even his harshest critics couldn't ignore the fact that his message was resonating. In the days that followed, high-profile figures from various industries weighed in. Oprah Winfrey tweeted, "Sometimes the most unexpected voices speak the loudest today." Barron Trump reminded us of the power of hope. On the other hand, late-night comedians took a more cynical view, joking about whether his speech was ghostwritten or staged for political gain. Despite the mixed reactions, the sheer volume of discussion proved one thing: people were talking. Perhaps the most surprising responses came from young people, many of whom felt personally addressed by Barron's words. High school students recorded videos reflecting on his message, with some sharing how it inspired them to become more involved in their communities. On college campuses, debates about leadership and the responsibility of the next generation surged, with Barron's speech often cited as a catalyst. The speech also sparked heated discussions about privilege and authenticity. Critics pointed to Barron's wealthy upbringing, arguing that his call for unity might feel empty to those struggling in America's most marginalized communities. "It's easy to talk about common ground when you've never had to fight for your own," read one viral tweet. However, for every critical post, there were dozens defending him, insisting that his youth and sincerity made his words worth considering. Even within the Trump family, reactions were notable. Sources close to the family reported that Barron's decision to speak had been entirely his own, a move that surprised even his siblings. Ivanka Trump, often seen as the family's spokesperson for diplomacy, reportedly told a confidant, "I've never been prouder of him." Meanwhile, Donald Trump, known for dominating the spotlight, remained unusually quiet about his son's speech. As the media frenzy continued, many speculated about Donald Trump's thoughts, but one thing became clear: Barron Trump had stepped out of the shadows and into the national spotlight in a way no one expected. His words, whether viewed as profound or performative, had made people pause and reflect on unity, responsibility, and the possibility that even in the most divided times, a moment of sincerity could still have an impact. However, as the nation debated his speech, a larger question emerged: was this just a fleeting moment of unity, or could it mark the start of something more lasting? As the public analyzed Barron's speech, another question arose: what motivated him to step forward on such a monumental stage, especially when he had spent much of his life deliberately staying out of the spotlight? It was a bold decision. Those who knew Barron closely began to offer insights into the young man behind the public persona. Teachers from his time at St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Maryland described him as a thoughtful student who preferred listening over speaking, often absorbing debates and discussions without joining in. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, one former teacher recalled, but when he did speak, it was clear he had something meaningful to say. Barron Trump's words had always carried weight. Though his towering height and famous last name made him impossible to ignore, classmates described him as surprisingly humble. One friend from his private school days shared that Barron never used his family name to gain an advantage. If anything, he tried to downplay it. He wanted to be judged on who he was, not where he came from, the friend said. Barron's mindset seemed shaped by the unique duality of his life. On one hand, he was the youngest son of one of the most divisive figures in modern history. On the other, he was simply a teenager trying to figure out who he was. Friends from his time at New York University's Stern School of Business spoke of his curiosity and drive to understand the world around him. He was always reading, always asking questions, one peer recalled. He didn't shy away from tough topics. He genuinely wanted to understand why people thought the way they did, even when their opinions clashed with his own. Behind closed doors, Barron had reportedly been reflecting on this moment for months. According to a family friend, he had been deeply affected by the divisions in the country and the criticism his family faced. He knew people often had preconceived notions about him because of his last name. He wanted to show the world who he really was, the source said. Barron's decision to speak at his father's inauguration wasn't made lightly. He spent weeks crafting his speech, going over drafts, and seeking feedback from a small circle of trusted confidants. Barron Trump wanted every word of his speech to reflect his own thoughts and values, free from the influence of political strategists or family members. This was his moment, a close friend shared. He wasn't trying to represent his father or the administration, he was speaking as himself. Even his calm, composed, and deeply earnest demeanor during the speech spoke volumes about his internal process. Barron wasn't the loud, charismatic type, but his quiet confidence carried its own weight. Body language experts later analyzed his speech, noting his deliberate pauses and measured gestures, which suggested someone fully aware of the impact of his words. Despite all his preparation, Barron understood the risks. He knew his speech would be scrutinized, that his motives would be questioned, and that he might face backlash. But he chose to speak anyway, driven by the belief that even the smallest spark of hope was worth igniting. "If I can make one person feel heard," he reportedly told a friend, "then it's worth it." Barron's mindset showed a rare blend of introspection and courage. He wasn't trying to prove himself or make a grand statement, he simply wanted to be honest and bridge a gap he felt had grown too wide. In doing so, he captured the attention of a nation that, for once, seemed willing to pause and listen. As Barron's motivations became clearer, it was evident that his words were more than just a speech, they were a personal declaration. The bigger question remained: could Barron's message survive the harsh realities of public discourse, or would it be drowned out by the noise of cynicism and division? The impact of his speech was immediate and far-reaching, quickly spreading well beyond the Capitol steps. In the days after the inauguration, it became the centerpiece of national conversations. Political analysts, social commentators, and everyday citizens all grappled with the weight of his words. Some saw it as a rare moment of clarity in an increasingly polarized world, while others dismissed it as fleeting idealism. Regardless of opinion, one thing was clear: Barron Trump had sparked something that couldn't be ignored. Across the country, small but meaningful changes began to take shape. In San Diego, a group of high school students started a community forum where people of differing political views could come together to discuss local issues. Inspired by Barron's emphasis on listening, they invited guest speakers from all walks of life to share their perspectives, fostering genuine and unforced dialogue. If someone like Barron can speak up in such a big moment, we can definitely do it here in our own backyard, one student organizer shared. In Cincinnati, a grassroots campaign called Common Ground emerged, aimed at uniting neighbors divided by political affiliations. The organizers cited Barron's speech as their inspiration, using his words about starting with ourselves as their slogan. Weekly meetings were held in coffee shops and libraries where attendees shared personal stories, focusing on understanding one another instead of debating political policies. The initiative quickly gained momentum, proving that even small acts of unity could have a profound impact. On social media, the ripple effect was equally significant. Young people, often criticized for political apathy, began using platforms like TikTok and Instagram to share their reflections on Barron's message. Videos tagged with #BarronSpeechChallenge encouraged participants to highlight ways they could personally contribute to bridging divides, from volunteering at shelters to mentoring younger students. The hashtag amassed millions of views, turning an isolated speech into a viral movement. However, not all reactions were positive. Critics argued that Barron's speech was out of touch, claiming that someone raised in privilege could never truly understand the struggles faced by everyday Americans. A prominent political commentator dismissed his words as well-intentioned but naive, saying they offered little in terms of concrete solutions. This backlash sparked a counter-response, with supporters emphasizing that the power of Barron's speech lay not in policy but in its message of hope. Within the Trump family, the ripple effect was equally clear. Melania Trump reportedly expressed pride in her son's courage, calling his speech a reflection of his heart. His older siblings, known for their active roles in their father's political ventures, seemed genuinely moved by Barron's decision to carve his own path. "He's always been the quiet one," Eric Trump told a journalist, "but when he speaks, you listen." Even Donald Trump remained uncharacteristically quiet about his son's speech. Donald Trump, who had built his career on commanding the spotlight, appeared to step aside momentarily, allowing his youngest son to shine. While he refrained from commenting publicly on Barron's speech, sources close to the family revealed that the former president had privately praised his son's poise and sincerity. He knew it was Barron's moment, one insider shared, and he respected that. As the weeks passed, Barron's speech continued to ripple through various sectors of society. Universities included excerpts of his remarks in leadership seminars, churches and synagogues referenced his call for unity in sermons, and even corporations began using his message in team-building exercises, emphasizing empathy and understanding in the workplace. These ripples, though small in scale, carried undeniable energy. They served as a reminder that change doesn't always come from sweeping reforms or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it begins with a single voice, a voice willing to stand up and say, "We can do better." But as the ripples spread, a lingering question remained: could this momentum lead to lasting change, or would it fade into memory like so many moments before? As the echoes of Barron Trump's speech faded, the deeper meaning behind his words began to settle in the minds of those who had heard them. At its core, his message wasn't about politics, power, or family legacy. It was about the simple yet profound act of connection. It was about choosing understanding over division, compassion over indifference, and courage over complacency. Barron's speech challenged everyone, no matter their background or beliefs, to reflect on their own role in the state of the nation. His call to start with ourselves resonated deeply because it placed the responsibility for change not on distant leaders or government policies, but on each individual. It was a message that transcended political ideologies and reminded people of their shared humanity. "If we can't find common ground," Barron had said, "then the cracks will only grow deeper." This idea struck a powerful chord in a world where polarization often feels overwhelming. Barron didn't offer solutions to every problem, nor did he pretend to have all the answers. Instead, he did something far more impactful. He reminded people that change starts small, with a conversation, a gesture, or even just a moment of listening. The moral message of his speech was especially meaningful for younger generations, many of whom saw themselves in Barron, a young person trying to make sense of a world filled with anger and noise. His words empowered them to believe that their voices, no matter how small, could make a difference. One teenager from Arizona shared on social media, "I'm just one person, but Barron made me realize that one person can start a ripple that turns into a wave." For older generations, Barron's message carried both challenge and hope. It reminded them that the responsibility for the future doesn't rest solely on the shoulders of the young. His speech urged them to leave behind a world worth inheriting, one built not on division, but on collaboration. "Our children will inherit what we leave behind," he had said. "Let's make it something they can be proud of." Yet, the moral message extended beyond just individual action. Barron's words served as a blueprint for how communities, organizations, and even nations could approach healing. His call for unity wasn't a naive wish for everyone to agree, but a plea to rediscover the power of empathy. "It's not about winning arguments," he had said, "it's about understanding why the other side feels the way they do." The simplicity of this message was its strength. In a time when political rhetoric often feels overly complicated and inaccessible, Barron's words stood out for their clarity and sincerity. They weren't meant to persuade or manipulate, they were a reflection of one young man's hope for a better future. The moral takeaway was clear: unity isn't a grand gesture, it's a daily choice. It's choosing to listen instead of shout, to help instead of judge, to find common ground even when it's difficult. Barron's speech reminded everyone that the power to bridge divides lies within each of us, if we're willing to try. But as his speech settled into the collective consciousness, one question lingered: would his words inspire lasting change, or would they fade into just another fleeting moment in the nation's history? Barron Trump's speech wasn't just a moment, it was a call for reflection, action, and change. His words carried an undeniable truth: the future of the nation rests not on the shoulders of one leader or one family, but on the collective choices of every individual. And while his address may have been brief, its message was anything but. Its impact lingered, prompting everyone who heard it to pause and ask themselves, "What can I do to make a difference?" Barron's speech wasn't about grand gestures or sweeping reforms, it was about the everyday decisions that shape the fabric of our society. It was about choosing to listen to a coworker with a different political view instead of arguing, about reaching out to a neighbor you've never spoken to, or finding common ground with a family member you've disagreed with for years. It was a challenge to each of us to take the first step, no matter how small, toward bridging the divides that often feel so permanent. Barron's message of hope and responsibility wasn't without its challenges. Many were skeptical, questioning whether words alone could truly create change. But as the ripples of his speech began to spread, from grassroots movements to conversations in living rooms, it became clear that words spoken from the heart have the power to inspire action. For those who felt moved by his message, the next steps were clear. They began engaging in their communities, reaching across divides, and making small but meaningful changes in their daily lives. And for those who doubted him, the message remained: change doesn't require belief in one person's vision, it starts with each of us, in our own actions. It requires belief in the possibility of something better. Barron's speech also left a lasting mark on his family's legacy. While the Trump name has always been polarizing, this moment offered something unexpected: a glimpse of sincerity and vulnerability from a young man determined to carve his own path. It showed that even in the most unlikely circumstances, the power of words could unite rather than divide. As we reflect on Barron's words, the question isn't whether his speech will be remembered, it's whether we will act on the lessons he left us. The true legacy of his moment at the podium depends on how we, as individuals and as a nation, choose to respond. Will we let his words fade into history, or will we carry them forward, using them as a guide to build a future based on understanding and respect? The choice is ours. Each of us has the power to take small steps toward healing the divisions that threaten to tear us apart. And as Barron reminded us, real change starts with those small steps. So, what will your step be? Let us know in the comments how you're inspired to make a difference. And if you believe in the power of hope and unity, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the impact we all can have. This story isn't just about Barron Trump, it's about all of us and the future we want to create.